Welcome to the Happy Homeschooler Podcast, a digital support group for everyone interested in a learning lifestyle. I'm your host, Holly.
I'm your co-host, Melody.
Well, today we're going to be talking about what to do when your kids won't listen. But first, Melody, what have you been up to?
My daughter and I did something a little out of the ordinary last week. We went shopping, and we haven't done that in ages, but things wear out. And so she was shopping for a couple of items, and I have to tell you, it was a long day, and I'm glad that I don't go out and shop all the time. Glad to be home.
So did y'all literally shop until you dropped?
We did. We did shop until we dropped. We had one more stop on our list, and we looked at each other and said, nah. So I don't know if we just, are out of practice because we don't go out very much anymore, but we had what the most essential things came first, and that last stop we decided was something we could roll over to another day. How about you? What are you up to?
Oh, I just realized that I need to get my Easter decorations up. So I told my husband, I'm going to do some Easter decorating today. And he kindly got all the boxes of Easter items down. So that's going to be one of our tasks. And last time we visited, I said that I wasn't getting my exercise. And so I'm happy to report that I have been consistently exercising for 50 minutes a day, and I am seeing results. So, and this little challenge I'm doing is a 50-day challenge, and today is day 13. So I have a while to go, but I'm already seeing results. I'm really happy about that.
Oh, that's awesome. I saw that you were doing that consistently, and I'm inconsistently consistent over here. But I've gotten like every other day what I wanted to get done, and I can tell a difference. So
it's amazing how quickly our bodies respond to that little bit of everyday activity. So good for you, and it really doesn't take that much time. I think our brains tell us, oh, I don't have time for this, but we have time to do other things. And
did you say 50 minutes a day?
50. Mm-hmm.
Oh my! Well, I'm doing 20 minutes a day and thinking that is good. So I applaud your efforts.
Well, awesome. It's just a particular challenge I'm doing that requires that. But, for I believe we shared that the CDC and other places say 30 minutes a day is good for adults. So I may scale back to 30 minutes a day after the challenge is over. We are seeing a lot of people express that their kids are giving them challenges over schoolwork, over household activities. And so we wanted to address that today because if you can't get your kids to listen, you can't do much of anything. And that's really going to impact homeschooling and everything else.
Oh, that's so true, because if your children aren't listening to you, it's not going to be that pleasant. If there are things that need to be getting done and they're not on the team or not on board, a lot of people get really frustrated with that.
Yes, it's very unhelpful when you say to a child, I need you to pick up your toys, and they go do something else instead, or they go into their room ostensibly to pick up their toys, and when you check on them later, they're building their best Lego creation ever. Or yes. When you say it's time to do whatever the subject is that you've got to tackle, and they just say, no, I won't do it. Or they dawdle. Dawdling is another way for a kid to say no. They're so pokey, and they take forever to get something done until you're ready to pull your hair out. What things have you seen? What issues have you encountered where kids are not listening? What kind of behaviors and things have you seen?
Well, sometimes it'll be like they're ignoring the parent, or they're reading a book, or they don't want to stop, or they start complaining about not finished yet, or they just don't want to. They don't want to. That's one thing. I don't want to do that.
Some pushback.
A little bit of pushback. And then if we don't have skills to navigate that, it escalates, and then everyone's unhappy, and still whatever it is that needed to get done isn't getting done.
Yeah, and I've had kids who actually said, no, I'm not going to do that, which makes me very amazed. But I've had some kids go there, and when we don't expect that to happen, we're caught off guard. And we need tools to help us. One of the things that I grew up in kind of a chaotic household. So some days something was great, and the next day I got in trouble for doing the same thing. So when I became a parent, I knew I wanted to fix that. I started looking for some kind of a framework. Mm-hmm. And so I found some family rules. And once we had some family rules, that was really helpful. But before you get to family rules, you really have to understand what the different styles of parenting is and why it's important to have some expectations and to have a framework on how you're going to deal with these things that come up, because kids are going to argue and push back, but you have to understand why it's important to address it, because some parents are like, well, that's just kids.
But there is another way. You don't have to live in an environment where people are arguing with each other all the time.
Right. And just because that's a natural tendency of children, some children, some kids will push back more than others, but just because that's a natural tendency doesn't mean that there's not things you want to do to help them, because you're going to unleash these people on the world someday, and they can't go into a workplace or into a college classroom and be like, nope, not going to do it.
Can you imagine? Yeah, you wouldn't get very far in your classwork, and you might not keep your job.
Right. So it's important to give kids the skills and to have parents have skills. So there are 3 basic parenting styles. Melody, do you know what parenting style you had with your kids? Or did you do any studying on that? I know you have a degree in early childhood, so I would imagine.
Oh, probably so much studying. Let's start off by describing those for our listeners.
So the parenting styles, like we said, they're authoritative. Then there's also permissive, and there's authoritarian. Authoritative parents, the parenting style was first defined by a woman named Diane Baumrind, and her idea was to focus on the ways parents attempted to control their kids. Control sounds kind of like really overbearing. This was back in 1966, but permissive parents, she says, are reluctant to impose rules and standards, and they let the kids regulate themselves. Some kids are better than others at that, where authoritarian parents demand a sort of a blind obedience. Like my mother was kind of that. She'd say, just do as I do, and you weren't allowed to ask questions. You got in trouble if you didn't just do it.
So.
Yeah. And then authoritative parents, they were kind of more moderate, more in the middle. So they would set high standards, be nurturing and responsive to their kids, showing respect to the kids, and helping kids to have emotional support. So, so when I was a kid, sometimes if we were crying, we'd be told to just dry it up, like stop crying. You're going to cry. I'll give you a reason to cry. Really, really tough stuff. But like sometimes if my son's upset, a couple weeks ago, we had a plan to go do something and we couldn't because there's some construction on our road. It prevented us from leaving. And my son was very upset. And he went into his room, and when he came back out, I said, yeah, I would feel really upset about that, and are you really upset? And he said, yes. And I said, I'm really upset too, but sometimes things don't go the way we planned. So let's think of ways we can find something else to do. So I supported him emotionally. I helped him to come up with another solution that was acceptable to us both. I put myself on his level.
Right.
Kids are more cooperative in that case because they feel heard.
Yes, exactly. They just want to know that you understand how they feel, and sometimes that's all it takes. And if you're a person jotting down phrases that are helpful, that is one of the things that was so helpful. It's like things don't always work out the way we plan, and I said that a lot because people would get upset, plans would change suddenly, and I had a person who did not like sudden change, and so anything outside of our plan was very distressing to them, and that phrase helped them so much over the years. Like, things don't always go the way we plan, and then it was, what can we do instead? Or let's think of something else we can do. Might not be as much fun, but we can roll our plan over to another day. Because life is full of disappointments like that when things don't go the way you plan, and you've got to understand that you just roll with it. But you can pause and be upset about it. before you move on.
Yes. And that's the thing is we want to give our kids tools for dealing with things that are frustrating or aggravating or annoying. And one of the tools can't be yelling or not doing it,
Stomping around.
Right. And so learning our parenting styles, and if we have a parenting style that's not helpful, finding steps to change that parenting style. Again, because I grew up in a family where we just really didn't have a lot of empathy from our parents. I had to learn a lot about how to interact with my kids, and some of it I went back to how I felt as a kid when my feelings weren't being heard or they were being dismissed, and just having consistent rules in place that helped me to stay on the right page and help my kids to know what to expect. Those solved a lot of problems for us, and every family is going to have different things that they want as their family rules. I was surprised to find out in researching this episode that the CDC offers a lot of information on parenting and creating family rules.
I'm amazed. So I would never think to look there for.
I would not have myself either. But it's a very good resource that is suitable for people of all backgrounds, because some people aren't religious, so they wouldn't look for parenting information from religious people. It's a very nice basic guidance. So I highly recommend going to take a look at that, especially if what you're doing right now isn't working and you need some help on your parenting.
So do you feel like you grew up in a permissive home?
Oh, absolutely not. In fact, I remember when I was a kid, my father liked to show us off like dogs to if we were like in a gathering with some other people, and he would call us and he would say, sit, and we would just sit, and then he'd say stand, and we'd stand. And I really remember thinking that was pretty awful. But no, my parents were authoritarian and we were very obedient, because if you weren't obedient, it was really so unpleasant. You didn't want to go there. And I had some friends who had permissive parents, which we haven't really talked about much.
Yeah, what does that look like?
Well, it looks like the kids are running the show. So some people that I saw in families where the parents were permissive, the kids would basically tell the mom, I want this for dinner, get me this or that. Or the parents would say things like, you probably should go brush your teeth. Like, I don't think dental care is kind of a arbitrary thing, but they would give the kids more ability to regulate themselves instead of imposing their rules and standards. One of the things that I saw that I thought was amazing was my niece, with her first child, said to him, do you want to take a nap? And I asked her, does he honestly have a choice about that? Because you just asked him whether he wants to or not. Asking your children what they want to do is a kind of a permissive stance. Like sometimes when they get older, obviously you're going to offer choices, but
well, that's different.
Yeah,
because that's not do you want to do it or not. That's which of these choices that I know are good for you would you like to choose?
Yes.
And not, like I had friends. One of the neighborhoods we lived in, she was a permissive mom. She wanted to be her child's friend. She wanted to. I can't quite put it into words, but they asked the child, who was 5, whether or not he wanted to move. And so
that's hilarious.
Well, I couldn't believe that they were going to put this huge decision on this small child's back, and also like of the houses, wanted him to decide which one to live in. And I remember just thinking, he's too young to be able to make that kind of a decision. That family, I'm not in contact with them anymore, but my heart went out to them because there were just so many things where I don't think the parents realized they were setting themselves up for distress.
Oh, sure.
But they had a lot of situations come up, and she just, couldn't figure out why it was so difficult. And I thought it was pretty obvious.
Yeah, I think people that are permissive they're well-intentioned. They're very well-intentioned. They don't want to run roughshod over their child, but children need guidance and they need leadership. Friendly, loving leadership, but still as the parent, it's our job to help our children navigate that bumpy road that's called childhood and adolescence to adulthood. It doesn't have to be as bumpy if they have a kind person leading the way.
Right.
So,
sometimes the way we parent is either a reaction to the way we were brought up or a reflection of if it was really good and we felt loved and cared for. And we tend to do what I always hear my mother's words coming out of my mouth. And sometimes that's really excellent. And then occasionally it's like, oh, I don't think I liked it when that was the way we did things when I was a kid. My parents were basically authoritative and more balanced. But at the same time, we knew that when mom and dad said something, they meant it. And it was because, like if you see your child fixing to run into the road and a car's coming and you yell, stop, you want them to stop to save their life. And so there are those times when, yes, you need to be able to listen and obey and follow instructions. And somehow they did a good job, I felt like, with us, where we knew we needed to listen and obey mom and dad.
Yeah, that's really good. I did not have authoritative parents. I had authoritarian parents. They were harder to talk to. You just couldn't bring some things up with them, and they just even as we got into the teenage years, they were just more like, these are rules, do them, don't ask questions. And I didn't enjoy that. So as a parent to my children, I have chosen the authoritative model where I still have standards for my kids, but we can have conversations about things. And if there's something going on that they feel they want to talk to me about, a rule that we have or whatever, I'm willing to have conversations about it. And I think that's much better. And my children, my adult children and I all are friends now. We actually seek out each other's company, which is a great joy to me. And I think that is because when I was raising them, I gave them a lot of consideration, but I also had standards for them to follow. And I think they knew how much I loved them and that the things we did were based in decisions that were for the best for them. So hopefully that's how they feel. But that's my view of it.
Right. I hope so. I had a really good friend who occasionally, when my children and her children were all in that middle school, junior high period of time where they're starting to make some of their own decisions, and she was so good at saying, instead of saying, that's a terrible idea, no, you can't do that, she would say, well, what's your plan? So she had a way to come alongside them and help them figure out a good way to do something instead of just being authoritarian and saying no. But she was protecting them and helping them think through some things that they maybe didn't think of because they don't know at that age they don't know all the dangers out in the world. But just the way that she would, like you said, come alongside, coaching them into adulthood. It was a real joy to see. And I was really thankful that my children had the benefit of being around another mom who was authoritative.
We're going to take a short break to hear a word from our sponsor. When we return, we'll talk about more reasons why you're having troubles in this area. And guess what, parents? It's not only on you.
Our podcast today is sponsored by Transcript Maker. It's an online service that allows you to create professional high school transcripts in the comfort of your own home.
Sometimes our parenting styles can change depending on our mood, and nothing puts me in a worse mood than having to mess with an Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah, I've been there. That's what's so great about Transcript Maker. You can just plug in your info and let it calculate your GPA for you, and don't ruin your day.
Exactly. And you can get your 14-day free trial at www.transcriptmaker.com. And I'll tell you what else will make you happy is if you use our code HAPPY, HAPPY in all caps, when you decide to subscribe.
Right. You get a 20% discount with that code.
Yep.
Transcript Maker. Simply better transcripts.
So let's get back into more discussion on why we can't get our kids to listen. In the first half, we talked about how one of the reasons could be your parenting style, and we explored what they were. But those aren't the only issues we encounter that are causing these problems. So why are we having these issues? That's what we need to explore.
Right. Well, first of all, we're human beings and we are not perfect. And so relationships between people sometimes get a little prickly. And if we don't have skills, we don't always navigate those things very well. And sometimes we find that our child is having a bad day and we're not realizing it. So,
right. So
sometimes it's just the way your child is feeling that day.
Yeah. So some of the issues are on the parents and some of the issues are on the kids. We're all familiar with the Peanuts cartoon where the adults are talking and they're going, ma, 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 ma. So I think a lot of times we as parents, we think we're offering some clear communication to our kids. But what they hear is ma, 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 because parent thinking and kid thinking aren't always aligned. So my daughter, sometimes I would tell her that I wanted her to do a certain thing. And in her mind, it was like, yep, I'll do it at some point in the day. But my thinking was, do it now. However, I didn't communicate that information. So, parent communication is a big part of why kids aren't doing the things we want them to do. And we as parents need to realize that sometimes children think in very concrete ways that we don't think anymore. So we have to do a little bit better of a job at expressing ourselves clearly. Feed the cat now.
Yes.
You can watch TV at 3, things like that.
Specifics, and also just some concrete language, because I've heard people say, for example, while we're in church, I want you to be good. What does it mean? Be good at church, instead of them saying, I want you to sit quietly next to me, or even chew with your mouth closed. Just give some give information. I think a lot of times we say something thinking that our children know what we mean, and they don't. And so, while we're in the store, I want you to walk next to me and ask the permission before touching anything. I had a real what's the word I'm looking for?
Tactile kid.
Yes, and they wanted to touch everything. So that just being specific like that helped us not end up with a lot of extra things in our basket. Ask permission before touching anything, or even just to say, it's time for you to say goodbye and come inside. We just need to give them more clear-cut instructions. They are concrete thinkers, and so we've got to communicate our expectations in concrete language and tell them what to do, because that's the other thing I hear, stop that a lot. Stop that. Like, okay. Then what? So
a little work at the beginning can help eliminate some of those things as well. So with my children, when we were getting ready to go somewhere, I would explain, we're going to go to this place. We're going to be doing this thing. These things will happen. Here's what I want you to do. If you don't know what to do, you need to ask me. Don't just go off on your own trying to figure it out. So they knew before we left. I have a friend whose youngest daughter, when she was about 3, when they pulled up into their driveway at home, the little girl was old enough to unbuckle her car seat. And so she would unbuckle her car seat, and when the doors were opening, she would jump out and she would run into the road.
Oh, my goodness.
And the mom was said, I'm not sure what I should do about this. And I said, well, there are several things, but you need to set the expectation beforehand. Like, hey, we're going to be pulling up in the driveway, and when we unbuckle our seatbelts, we're all walking into the house. And that helped that little girl. She was just kind of impulsive, and she was free, so she didn't know what to do with her freedom. So she would run to the neighbor's yard, whatever. But giving them information, and that seems silly to us. We know when we get home we're going into the house, but we don't know what the kid is thinking.
Right. Or when you get somewhere, like I wanted my children to all stay. We were going to go in together, partly because I had 7. I didn't want to lose someone. So it's like, wait by the car till everybody's unbuckled, and then we'll all go in together. But just to establish that beforehand.
Right. Same thing with schoolwork or anything. We're going to do this. We're going to need to do it for this long, and then we're going to do this next thing. It's just helpful. I mean, we don't want people to spring stuff on us. So if we want our kids to be cooperative with the activities, we need to give them communication. We also need to explain to them why sometimes. So about a year ago, my son, who's now 8, he just didn't want to do his schoolwork because, let's face it, playing with Legos and bouncing on an exercise ball and climbing on the swing set is infinitely more fun than adding numbers. Mm-hmm. But as I explained to him, it's the state law that you have to be educated. And that if I, as his parent, didn't make sure he was educated, either at home or in a public school or a private school, I, as the parent, could be subject to legal action. And that was not acceptable. And that he, as a person who doesn't know how to add and subtract and all those things that you have to learn, he has to be educated. And so it was really interesting. Once I explained that to him, and it wasn't just I was trying to ruin his day and get in the way of him and his very interesting activities, he started to get more on board with participating more willingly in his schoolwork. He had to do it when he didn't really want to, but it did change his attitude somewhat. And if you have a kid who's got whyitis and they say why about everything, one of the reasons is that they might have ADHD. There are a whole host of things that kids might do, and we're going to explore the topic of ADHD in our Learning Challenges series in the future. And of course, we're not making any diagnoses, but there are reasons why sometimes kids are having a hard time following our instructions, and they may have some issues, ADHD or, other learning challenges. They could be on the autism spectrum. There are reasons why, and there are ways to fix these issues.
Right. So it helps to know if you're dealing with some developmental issue or a challenge of some sort, or if they're just being obstinate that day. And sometimes they're just asking why to get out of it, but sometimes it's because that's the way their brain works. They need to know why, and they are trying to figure things out. And it's really helpful to know what's going on.
Right. And several of my children had anxiety. I didn't notice it as much early on as later on in my parenting, but those kids that had anxiety, which is another issue that can affect the ability of your child to listen and to do their schoolwork, is because they had concerns or they were uneasy about something that was going on around them. So again, these are things we're going to cover in our Learning Challenges series, but sometimes it is on the kids, sometimes it is on the parents, and sometimes it's a combination of both. Mm-hmm. So we talked about these issues, and now I think it will be fun to talk about how we're going to fix the issues, or how to fix some of the issues. And Melody, I know you've had a lot of really great creative things that you did with your kids. Can you share some of the things that you've done when your kids weren't cooperating?
Well, let's see. There's so many to choose from. Like I had a child who, very logical, probably would have been good at debate, but they would like to argue with me about things. And I think that sometimes as parents, we are so focused on getting things done that we'll just engage in an argument, and then they'll say something, we'll say something back, and then before you know it, for some reason you're arguing with this young child. And I did learn to sometimes to just say, I'm not going to argue with you about this, just to kind of short circuit that. Basically, they're trying to get out of doing something by challenging what I've asked them to do. We just have to be the adults. And so it's like, I'm not going to argue with you about that. It's time to feed the dog or whatever. Or they'll challenge me with some comeback for maybe it's not their turn, or it should be someone else's turn or whatever. And I did learn to say things like, sometimes it was, you already said that. The trash still needs to be taken out. Just to have ways to respond to them without engaging in an argument. And sometimes that would be, some reason why they didn't need to go to bed right now. And I would learn to say, nevertheless, it is bedtime and it's time for you to go to bed. So avoiding arguments, just to deflate an argument, just to not rise to that challenge, but to just let the air out of that and move on, was one of the best things I learned, especially when I had a number of children to manage and we needed to keep our routine moving forward. I didn't have time to stand there and argue with somebody about whether or not it was fair or their turn, or should they be asked to do such a thing.
That's where having family rules and chore charts and things like that are very helpful, because you're not having to reinvent the wheel and try to decide something on the spur of the moment. So if you have a chore chart, my kids, they had a rotation of chores. And so, and they also had a rotation of privileges. So
Right.
back in the day when kids could sit up front in the car, there was a lot of arguing about who could sit up front. I ended up, because I had 5 at that time, everyone had an assigned seat in the van and a day of the week. And so if it was your day of the week, you got to be the upfront person that day. You got to collect the mail. So nobody had to argue about it anymore. We didn't have to keep covering that ground, which is exhausting for parent and child. We weren't drawn into endless discussions. So
Well, and then it's fair because obviously for children it is fair because they know they'll have a turn. And it's not something that you're just deciding on the spur of the moment. There's a plan. And so that builds a lot of security.
Yes, it does. And I think that's where some of the problems also stem when kids are not cooperative, is that they're feeling insecure about something. They feel like maybe you have put too undue of a burden on them, or they're not getting something they need. And so they're looking for it in other ways. Of course, kids don't think that way. They don't think, well, I don't think my mom spent enough time with me today, so I'm going to cause a ruckus. That's not the way it, they don't hash that out in their brain. Or this is hard to understand, so I'm not going to do it. They just don't behave quite as well as you would hope. And we actually covered some of this in a previous episode about dealing with resistance. So if you haven't heard that episode, it's a great companion to this one.
It's true. What other things have you run into in the course of your day?
Well, my oldest daughter had an undiagnosed math learning disability. It wasn't diagnosed till she was in high school, and she did not like to do math. So one day, I would say, hey, we're going to do math. Well, she didn't want to do it when I told her. So I did also learn that sometimes you can offer choices, and it didn't matter to me really if we did math first, second, last. We had to do it. So I would say to her, when would you like to do math? And so she could pick. That helped a little bit. But one day I think, we were learning decimals or something that was really hard for her. And she said she just didn't want to do her math. And I thought, okay, well, she has to learn that math is really in everything we do. So I said to her, you don't have to do math today. And she was really happy. Until it was lunchtime, and she asked me to cut her sandwich into kitty corners. And I said I couldn't do that because that was a form of geometry, which was math. And then she wanted me to make Kool-Aid so we could have Kool-Aid at lunch. And I said I couldn't do that because measuring was math. And after a few more of these interchanges, she said, give me my math paper, I'll go do it. And my point was, sometimes, you can't say to the child, you have to do it, just do it. Or you can find some kind of a creative way to drive the point home. And I was very sweet and friendly about, I can't cut your sandwich like that.
Yes, you weren't doing math either.
Right, yeah. And so, that helped her. Sometimes you have to do, run a little end game around them. But a lot of times fixing the issues, I think, again, it just goes back to those clear expectations and that information. So when our family rules, we actually took time to go over each rule, one rule a week until we got through them. We have 21. And I had coloring pages that went with them. And we talked about the rules and why they were important. So my kids didn't think I just made them up to ruin their lives.
Right.
One of the rules is if we get something out, we put it away. Nothing is more frustrating than looking for your scissors. And all my kids have experienced that. Well, where were the scissors? Oh, they were in somebody's room. Well, I wanted to use them. That's why we have that rule. When you get it out, you put it away. The rules are there to make life better for all of us, not to ruin someone's life. So kids you really need to understand and communicate to them why you have the rules. And kids also can have an opportunity to make some rules. Some of their rules are hilarious.
Do you have examples?
Oh, I don't have an example off the top of my head, but maybe they want to eat ice cream on the third Sunday of every month.
Fun things.
So why? Yeah. And you can also, so permissive parents might bribe a kid to get them to do what they want. If you do this, I'll give you, I hear parents at the store all the time, if you behave, you can have a candy bar. Okay, that's a bad idea, to set a precedent of you misbehaved, but now you stop that, so I give you something. But like my kids, if they achieve certain goals or they they got all their chores done or something, they could earn little tickets to go shopping in our treasure box. As adults, we get rewards. Do these things, get a bonus.
Right.
It's not saying, hey, you were bad, and if you stop being bad, I'll give you something. It's, if you meet these goals, I'll give you something, which is totally different.
It is different. It's the difference between if this, then that, which is kind of bribey, but when this has occurred, then we can all do this other thing. And so just as a way to say something, instead of saying if you, say when. When you finish picking up your toys, then we can go outside, or then we can have a treat, or then you can do whatever you want. But just sometimes I think the way we say things, we need to be mindful of whether or not we're setting our families up for success and a positive, environment, or if we are inadvertently setting the stage for a big argument.
Right. Exactly. Well, we could discuss this topic for a long, long time, and we'll probably revisit it in the future.
Yeah, I think that we've given our listeners a lot of things to think about, a little bit of homework for right now, and some things to mull over.
We usually have a big question, but today's topic was a question so big that it had to be its own episode. So if you have additional questions we didn't cover, please email us at happyhomeschoolpod@gmail.com.
Follow us on Twitter @_homeschoolpod.
Find us on Facebook and Instagram at Happy Homeschool Pod.
Or look for us on YouTube, Apple Podcast, and Spotify.
Thank you for joining us today. I'm Holly.
I'm Melody. Happy homeschooling.
Hi, this is your host, Holly Williams Urbach. Thank you for listening to the Happy Homeschooler Podcast, a Transcript Maker Production. My co-host is Melody Gillum. This episode was produced by Matthew Bass and edited by Norah Williams. Our graphic design is by Pete Soloway, and our music is by the Great Pangolin. You can find her music on YouTube and Twitter at Kylie Wins. That's Kailey Wins. If you'd like to help our podcast grow, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts. Or as always, tell people about us. And when we return, we'll talk more about how to address the issues that these